From a tender age, I was acutely aware that my destiny lay in becoming the third wife of the Xia family. While other young maidens delighted in flying kites and swinging on swings, I devoted my days in the Buddhist hall, reciting scriptures. Xia Shen, a martial artist, favored women of resolute character. In my quest to embody his ideal, I braved the rigors of horseback riding, enduring a broken leg without shedding a single tear. I exerted every ounce of my being to become the woman he desired, only to find that his affections were ensnared by a girl whose path diverged vastly from mine. The betrothal could not be annulled, and I turned to wed his elder brother, renowned for his ruthless and iron-fisted demeanor. After our marriage, the eldest son of the Xia family proved to be as aloof from women as the rumors suggested. Yet once, in a state of inebriation, Xia Shen found himself blocking my doorway, only for Xia Wang to shield me behind him, casting a cold, indifferent glance at his younger brother. She is now the esteemed wife of the Xia family. What business do you have with your sister-in-law at this late hour? He inquired icily. Xia Shen had fallen for the daughter of the Cui family, who operated a wonton stall at the city gate. She bore no name of her own, simply referred to as Cui Senyang, being the third daughter. With two older brothers, who were quite unruly and deep in gambling debts, she often found trouble at her stall. Stricken by a cold and besieged by debt collectors, she nearly succumbed to illness in the heavy snowfall. Xia Shen cleared Cui's family debts and secured respectable employment for her brothers. He rescued his beloved from the quagmire, yet, in his fervor, he forgot me entirely. The scandal erupted, stirring whispers throughout the city, with the daughter of the Su family becoming the subject of ridicule in the capital. My mother, incensed, insisted that my father confront the emperor to annul the marriage. My father summoned me to his study, yet remained silent. Practicing his calligraphy, I understood his sentiment. The union between the Su and Xia families was beneficial and not worth jeopardizing over a single woman. Moreover, this engagement had been orchestrated by the Empress herself during a banquet, and bringing it before the Emperor now would reflect poorly on us. The character he inscribed was Endor. I assured him that I would meet with Xia Shen. He nodded, set down his brush, and turned to peruse the volumes on the shelf. As I stepped out of the study, a flicker of resentment welled within me. I could not restrain myself and inquired of my father. The character, Endor, bears the weight of blood. Should Xia Shen treat me poorly after our marriage, what then? Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the desk, his eyes cold and piercing, laced with a bloodthirsty intensity. He enunciated each word with gravitas. The daughter of the Su family shall not be wronged. You need not worry. Initially, no one could have anticipated that Xia Shen would fall for a common girl running a stall. The third son of the Xia family, engrossed in official duties, often returned to the city just before the curfew. He detested troubling the household servants to prepare late-night meals, frequently opting for a simple bowl of wontons at the city gate instead. Over time, this bowl of wontons became his habit. One day, however, the stall vanished. At first, Xia Shen paid it no mind, waiting a month for the stall to reappear. But when it did not, he dispatched someone to investigate. In truth, the matter was not difficult to uncover. The locals were well aware and could provide the information with little inquiry. For the first time, the usually aloof Xia Shen lowered his head, intent on learning about a woman's life. He extended his hand, offering her assistance. As for the proprietress of the wonton stall, I presumed she would not engage in discussions of Buddhist scriptures with Xia Shen, nor accompany him on gallant horseback rides. However, as Xia Shenji returned home through the wind and snow in the dead of night, a lone lamp illuminated the interior, where a woman with her hair elegantly tied up stood by the stove, ladling a steaming bowl of supper for him. It was an undeniably heartwarming scene. Xia Sanlang and Cui Sanyang, how perfectly their names matched. I went to visit Xia Shenji, but he was likely quite busy. I waited for 2 hours, only to be met with the words of a servant. My master is still in the midst of receiving guests. Miss Su might consider coming another day. I am not one to persist in my endeavors, and seeing that the hour was still early, I instructed the carriage driver to take me to Cui Sanyang's place. The wonton stall at the city gate had long since closed, as Xia Shenji had secured a new shop for Cui Sanyang. This establishment was not located in the most bustling area of the capital, but rather at the entrance of a somewhat secluded alley. Given the financial prowess of the Xia family, it would be easy to keep a canary. However, it would not be appropriate for such a canary to engage in trade openly. Xia Shenji had allowed her to continue pursuing her passions, clearly putting thought into the serene environment of this location. The shop was modest yet immaculate. By the time I arrived, it was past meal hours, and there were but a few patrons. Choi Sanyang no longer served wontons. Instead, her shop advertised noodle soup. The wonton soup at the city gate would, after all, be exclusively enjoyed by the third master of the Xia family. From the carriage, I peered through the curtains and caught a distant glimpse of a girl rolling dough. The distance was too great for me to discern her expression, but I noted her red hairband and sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her movements swift and efficient, so different from what I had imagined. I had heard of Choi Sanyang's life story and had anticipated her to possess a gentle demeanor. The alley was quiet, and the Su family carriage was rather conspicuous. Choi Sanyang evidently spotted me. After a moment's hesitation, she wiped her hands clean and approached the carriage. May I inquire if the one seated within is the young lady of the Su family? What is it? I asked. The person outside replied. I have heard young Master Xia speak of you. This shop was opened with funds lent to me by him, and I shall repay him once I start earning. As I fiddled with the Buddhist prayer beads I wore on my wrist, I had not yet spoken when the sound of galloping hooves approached from behind. Xia Shinji, who was in the midst of receiving guests, tightened the reins, a cold demeanor on his face, protectively placing himself in front of Choi Sanyang, and said urgently, Miss Su, if you have grievances with me, why trouble a young lady? I was taken aback, opening my mouth in surprise, and after a moment, I asked the carriage driver, have I troubled her? The driver replied, of course not, miss. You have not spoken a word since arriving. I then turned to the girl in the red sleeves. Have I troubled you? She seemed startled, clutching Xia Shinji's sleeve, and softly said, young master, what are you doing? You are misunderstanding Miss Su. Xia Shinji's complexion gradually paled, a hint of shame creeping onto his face. I understood his concerns. The Su family held considerable power. Even if I were to harm Choi Sanyang in the street, none would dare to pursue the matter. Yet I, Su Muyun, possessed my own dignity and pride. I merely wished to see what kind of girl I had lost to. I apologize. Sanyang is different from you. I, in my moment of agitation, have inadvertently offended Miss Su. I had waited outside the Xia residence for 2 full hours. Yet when trouble arose for Choi Sanyang, he arrived in an instant. The sun had already begun its descent, and behind Xia Shinji, a blazing red sun sank dramatically. In that moment, I suddenly contemplated the decades to come. I would be caught between Xia Shinji and another woman, and simply because of my noble birth, everything I did would be deemed wrong. Speaking too loudly would be seen as domineering. Remaining silent would be perceived as oppressive. Watching Choi Sanyang while seated would imply disdain, while standing to observe her would be tantamount to reprimanding her. I felt trapped within the confines of my inner chamber, day after day, yearning for a husband who did not love me to have a change of heart. I suddenly found the situation exceedingly dull. Along with the 8 years of affection I had harbored for Xia Shinji, I had once knelt before the Buddha, offering my prayers 3,000 times, and had even tamed fierce horses for the sake of Xia Shinji. I had envisioned countless times what married life with him would entail. We shared equally matched family backgrounds, similar interests, and a marriage decree bestowed by the current empress. We were perfectly suited for one another. Yet ultimately, I could not compete with the fact that Xia Shinji did not love me. I believe it was in that moment that I relinquished my feelings for him. I clenched my teeth, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill, and due to the exertion, my voice trembled with emotion. Young Master Xia, are you aware of the marriage contract between the Xia family and the Su family? Of course, but this matter requires careful consideration, he replied. I calmly interrupted him. The second son of the Xia family is already married. The daughter of the Su family cannot become a concubine. Then please convey this to your esteemed matriarch. A faint smile lingered on my lips, though the hand hidden within my sleeve trembled uncontrollably. I straightened my posture, delivering my final words to Xia Shinji. The marriage contract cannot be annulled. Send your elder brother to me. I had cherished feelings for Xia Shinji for many years. The first time I met him, I was merely 6 or 7 years old. At that time, I had accompanied my mother to Jinshan Temple to pay my respects. While my mother listened to the master preach in the front courtyard, I grew restless and snuck into the back garden to play. Greedily, I plucked lotus flowers from the pond, only to accidentally fall into the water, where a young monk saved me. Soaked and covered in mud, one of my shoes lost. I was thoroughly frightened. It was strange. Although he wore the attire of a young monk, he had his hair bound, revealing him to be a lay disciple. His garments were also drenched, clinging to him in a disheveled manner. The young monk slipped his bracelet of prayer beads onto my wrist, gently wiping the mud from my face, softly assuring me not to be afraid. The matron who tended to my mother soon came looking for me and, upon seeing me, quickly embraced me, expressing her gratitude before hastily departing. Later, my mother learned that the one who saved me was the third master of the Xia family. Born under unusual signs, a passing priest had foretold that he would face a calamity at the age of 19. The Xia family initially dismissed it. Yet several of the priest's predictions later came to pass. Alarmed, the matriarch of the Xia family sent the young Xia Xinji to a temple for care, seeking guidance from esteemed monks to impart martial skills, hoping he would navigate through adversity. I had never held much belief in such matters. At the age of 6 or 7, I could hardly comprehend the sutras. Yet, concerning Xia Xinji, my kind-hearted savior, how could I allow him to falter at the age of 19? While other young ladies flew kites and chased butterflies, I spent my days in the temple. I bowed before the Buddha 3,000 times, praying for Xia Xinji's well-being. When Xia Xinji was finally returned to the Xia family at the age of 12, it was also the day the empress decreed the marriage between the Xia and Su families. My mother was displeased with the thought of her daughter being bound so early. Yet little did she know I was overjoyed. In this world, how many women have the freedom to marry whom they choose? I was indeed fortunate. Xia Xinji practiced martial arts. He once said that when he fulfilled his ambitions and brought peace to the realm, he would ride across mountains and rivers with his beloved. He hoped his wife would be skilled in horsemanship. In truth, the daughters of the Su family need not concern themselves with such pursuits. Few noble ladies in the capital engaged in such activities. My hands bore the calluses of reins, and my legs bore the marks of my horse's belly. I endured the pain of falling off a horse while learning to ride. Hearing that he favored strong-willed women, I held back my tears, refusing to shed a single drop, while my matron shed a basketful for me. Xia Xinji once gifted me a bracelet of prayer beads that broke. It fell at an inopportune moment during a temple fair, amidst a throng of people. I bent low, searching through the crowd, my white dress stained beyond recognition, my hands trampled and bloodied. Sensing the situation was dire, my matron forcibly lifted me, nearly dragging me back home. I later attempted to search for it, but alas, of the 18 beads, I only recovered 12. I had lost the only token given to me by my savior, and my mother, seeing my distress, sent someone to find 6 similar ones for me. They appeared identical, and no one else could discern the differences, but I could tell them apart at a glance. These were stories I had intended to share with Xia Xinji on our wedding night. Alas, that was in the past. Upon hearing of my change of heart, my mother was so startled that she knocked over her teacup. How can you marry him? The eldest son of the Xia family? He is not a suitable match. One cannot blame her for such a reaction. Xia Wangji, the eldest son of the Xia family, was notorious for his ruthless nature. He is the commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, a trusted confidant of the emperor, vested with the authority to conduct inspections and arrests, and holds jurisdiction over the imperial prison, a place more dreadful than death itself. Those who fall under the scrutiny of the Embroidered Uniform Guard are inevitably stripped of their very essence. None emerge from that abyss unscathed. Even the most esteemed court officials regard Xia Wangji with trepidation. For many years, Xia Wangji had remained unmarried. Once, a woman deliberately splashed water on his garments as a pretext to draw near, yet before she could even approach him, he dislocated her arm with a swift motion. Throughout the entire capital, no one had ever witnessed him casting a second glance at any maiden, nor had he been seen frequenting establishments of pleasure. Whispers circulated that the eldest son of the Xia family was utterly indifferent to the fairer sex. Moreover, though Xia Wangji was the firstborn, he was born of a concubine. He was 10 years my senior. While I was still learning to recognize characters, he was already apprehending criminals across the capital. Thus, when this betrothal was first proposed, no one had ever considered such a possibility. My mother, disregarding all else, fixed her gaze intently upon my eyes. Yuna, speak truthfully to your mother. Has that Xia Sanling said something to you? All these years, I have witnessed your actions. If Xia Sanling has done anything to you, I shall not let him off lightly. I clasped her hand in return. Xia Xinji has said nothing. It is I who have come to a realization. It is true that he once saved my life, yet fate has not woven our paths together. His heart does not belong to me. If I were to force this marriage, it would only lead to estrangement between us. Then, Turning to my father, I added, "Furthermore, marrying Xia Wangji would bring great advantage to our Su family." Perhaps it was the resolute determination in my eyes, for after a prolonged silence, my father slowly inquired, "Have you decided?" "Decided, and unalterably so." I had assumed the wedding would be delayed further, but the Empress Dowager suddenly fell gravely ill. Wishing to bring her joy, the Emperor recalled a match she had blessed in earlier years and, after court adjourned, specifically mentioned it to my father and the Xia family patriarch. Half a month later, the Xia family delivered the betrothal gifts to the Su residence. The dowry was exceedingly lavish, a full 64 chests, so numerous that the front hall could not contain them, with some even placed in the rear courtyard. The maids in my courtyard beamed with delight. "The highest standard of 64 chests, my lady. The groom truly holds you in high regard." As I gazed upon the vibrant red filling every room and courtyard, I understood clearly that Xia Wangji and I shared but a superficial acquaintance. This was merely an imperial decree, obliging a display of propriety. Yet I could not help but wonder how Xia Shenji had ultimately explained matters to his elder brother. The wedding was set for 3 months later. I did not see Xia Sanlang again. Rumor had it that the two brothers of Cui Sanyang, plagued by insatiable gambling urges, had wagered money using Xia Shenji's name. The gambling house did not press them, but ostentatiously delivered the promissory notes to the stone lions at the entrance of the Xia residence. How the matter was resolved, I never learned, only that Cui Sanyang's noodle soup stall ceased operation. Xia Shenji had arranged a separate residence for her, where she was attended to for all daily needs. Upon hearing this, I felt uneasy. I had met Cui Sanyang only once, and her first concern had been the rent for her stall. Clearly, she was a woman of pride, deeply troubled by the rumors alleging she had seduced and clung to Xia Sanlang. To truly become a caged canary, as those rumors suggested, would surely provoke conflict between her and Xia Sanlang. Yet these affairs were no longer my concern. I devoted myself to embroidering my wedding gown. As the weather grew warmer, the daughter of the Duke of Song, a childhood friend, invited me to a jewelry shop in the southern city to select accessories for her upcoming birthday. Even my mother and Song Ruashi were curious about my sudden betrothal to Xia Wangji, though both were of the Xia family. It was widely speculated that the Su family had always favored the third son, Xia Sanlang. Throughout the journey, Song Ruashi repeatedly hesitated, her eyes starting toward me. Seeing her struggle, I finally urged, "Ask away." She posed the inevitable question. How was I to respond? Should I confess that Xia Shenji did not love me, and that marrying him would only lead to my own suffering? Or admit that Xia Wangji's South influence in court offered greater benefits to the Su family? After a moment's reflection, I spoke against my true feelings. To be frank, I have long admired the eldest son of the Xia family. Just then, a contingent of the embroidered uniform guard passed by on duty. At their forefront rode a man astride a black steed, his robes embroidered with covert flying fish patterns, a chilling spring-mounted blade at his waist. His countenance was stern, his expression detached. It was him. My words faltered, my heart skipping a beat. Song Ruashi, seemingly unaware of the rider's identity, coughed lightly behind her sleeve as dust swirled, murmuring in complaint. Of all times to encounter these harbingers of doom, could they be off to confiscate another estate? Then, recalling our conversation, she fixed her burning gaze on me. "You've long admired the eldest Xia? How did I not know? When did this begin?" I gazed skyward, my mind blank as I fabricated a tale. "At the mid-autumn banquet hosted by Her Majesty the Empress last year." "Really? Was the eldest Xia even there?" "I recall Lord Xia never attends such events," I affirmed dryly. "He was. You've simply forgotten. In early April, I married the eldest son of the Xia family. The ceremony was grand, and to claim no regret would be untrue. After all, I had envisioned this day for many years. As my mother combed my hair, I was momentarily lost in thought. Was there another realm where Cui Sanyang did not exist, and Xia Shenji and I grew old together? The roar of firecrackers was deafening, the air thick with smoke and the clamor of the crowd. Before stepping into the bridal sedan, I misjudged my step and stumbled against the doorframe. A hand swiftly reached out to steady me. Glancing sideways through my veil, I glimpsed only a vague, shadowy figure. I murmured my thanks, unsure if he heard amid the din. Xia Wangji, being born of a concubine and with his mother deceased, was the eldest among his brothers. Holding a prominent court position, He had long since moved out of the main Xia residence to a separate estate. Yet, for the wedding, it was necessary to return to the main household to acknowledge relatives and present tea to the family patriarch as a new daughter-in-law. As the veil was lifted with a ceremonial rod, I first saw thin lips, then a prominent nose. Raising my eyes, I unexpectedly met Xia Wangji's gaze. I had seen him many times before, often in haste, a blade at his waist, only fleeting glimpses. This was the first time I observed him closely. Xia Shenji possessed a refined coolness, but his elder brother, though sharing some resemblance, bore far sharper and more severe features, likely honed by years steeped in bloodshed as a guardsman. Amid the boisterous crowd, I flushed unwittingly and offered him a shy smile. He seemed taken aback, then gradually returned the smile, the fierceness in his brow dissipating like mist. The wedding was magnificent, attended by many. I overheard guests gasping, marveling at the bride's beauty. The Su family's legitimate daughter, raised with utmost care, possessed grace and poise rivaling even the princesses of the imperial court. On her wedding day, she was undoubtedly the most radiant. Xia Wangji guided me to greet each member of the Xia family. I followed half a step behind, close enough to reach out if needed. There, I saw Xia Shenji again after so long. Even amidst a crowd, the third son of the Xia family stood out, a gentleman of jade-like elegance. The onlookers noticeably quieted for a moment. Whispers about Xia Shenji and me occasionally circulated in the capital, all watched, expecting me to falter. They underestimated me. Henceforth, my life would be with Xia Wangji. I would not provide them with even a moment as amusement. Wearing a faint smile, I greeted Xia Shenji with all due courtesy, as if for the first time. Third brother. His expression was far from cheerful, devoid of warmth though, upon reflection, he was never one for smiling. He addressed me, eldest sister-in-law. Unnoticed, Xia Wangji had taken my hand. I clasped his in return more firmly. Thus, my ties with the third son of the Xia family were severed forever. Married life with Xia Wangji proved tranquil. He was often absent, engrossed in official duties. The management of the household fell entirely to me. On occasions when I sought his counsel, he would simply advise me to follow my own judgment. The days for Xia Wangji to return home were indeed few. I casually buried a few melon seeds in the soil, and by the time he returned, a patch of sunflowers was already swaying in the breeze, their bright, crisp yellow standing vibrantly in the spring sunlight. Later, when he went out on an errand, he would always hand me a small silk pouch upon his return, filled with seeds from various regions. The soil and water of the capital differ from those of other places, and I could not guarantee that all would thrive. Yet I nurtured them as best I could. After an entire spring had passed, a myriad of flower seedlings sprouted in the garden, and I resolved to build a trellis, envisioning that by the next spring it would be adorned with morning glories. We had not consummated our marriage, and I was uncertain if this had indeed validated the rumors in the capital regarding his disinterest in women. However, I harbored a different layer of concern. It was impossible for Xia Wangji to be unaware of my feelings towards the third son of the Xia family. I claimed to have let go. Yet how much could others truly believe me? Yet, such matters were not ones I could broach with Xia Wangji, given his cautious nature and his preference for handling personal affairs himself. On one occasion, when he was preparing to travel to the outskirts of the capital, he needed to pack his belongings and I, unable to resist, handed him an umbrella, saying, "Take this, it is going to rain in a few days." He looked at me with mild surprise before accepting the umbrella. Sure enough, 2 days later, rain fell unexpectedly, and upon his return from his errand, he recounted how his subordinates had been drenched and had to seek shelter under a farmer's eaves. "How did you know it would rain?" I asked, smiling at him. "Can you guess?" He replied, his eyes reflecting a hint of inquiry. That night, as I bathed before sleeping, the water in the tub was scalding hot, prompting me to ask a maid to mix in some cool water. Xia Wangji's silhouette was cast upon the screen behind me. "You have old injuries. You ought to use more hot water to dispel the chill," he remarked. I had never seen a man while bathing, and in my shock, I instinctively sank into the water. The heat was unbearable, and I gasped for air, unable to rise immediately. In the midst of my confusion, I thought I heard him chuckle lightly, and when I looked up again, the space behind the screen was empty. He had already left. From then on, my nightly baths were with water that was warm but no longer scalding. By the end of September, Xia Wangji suffered a grave injury. He was brought back by his subordinates, and the palace physician declared that had the wound been just 2 inches deeper, it would have jeopardized his lungs. He was fortunate to be alive. The room was heavy with the scent of blood, so I moved 2 pots of jasmine to the window, fearing he might burn with fever in the night. I stayed by his side all night long. When Xia Wangji regained consciousness, the room was filled with the fragrance of jasmine, and the first rays of dawn cast a soft golden light upon the quilt, warming my heart. I became aware of this because I was lost in thought. Having stayed awake for 2 consecutive nights, my head was spinning, and I was completely unaware that he had awakened. I even greeted him with a muddled good morning. How foolish of me. He remained silent, simply gazing at me. It was not until a quarter of an hour had passed that I realized my oversight and hurriedly poured him some water, inquiring about how he felt. Xia Wangji called my name. Ayun, you look much haggard. The physician advised him to rest quietly, forbidding him from walking or becoming agitated until he healed. It had likely been many years since he had taken such an extended break. His subordinates dared not disturb him, only bringing him the most urgent matters, which could be summarized on thin sheets of paper that he would finish reading in no time. During his idle hours, he would lean back and watch me as I reviewed the accounts with the steward. One particularly dull day, during a tea break, he inquired, "What did you do while lying in bed with your broken leg?" I pondered for a moment before replying. I recited Buddhist scriptures. Xia Wangji shifted slightly, saying, "Then recite a passage for me." I recited a small section from the Heart Sutra. After finishing, he asked, "Do you enjoy worshipping Buddha?" I answered honestly, not particularly. I have always found it rather tedious, but I have grown accustomed to it over the years. Having broached the subject, I seized the opportunity to speak of Xieshini. Days pass whether they are good or bad, and I wish to maintain a long-term relationship with Xie Dalu, not wanting to grow distant from him over such matters. This was my first time discussing his younger brother with him, about learning to ride horses, reciting scriptures, and searching for pearls, things that Xieshini was unaware of, and, unexpectedly, I found myself sharing them with Xia Wangji. He listened quietly as I spoke of another man, his expression focused. I told him initially. I resented him for his relationship with Cui Sanyang. Why should it be so? For so many years, I struggled to become the person he desired, yet in the end, he did not love me at all. I continued. Eventually, I came to understand that from Xieshini's perspective, why should he grow to love me because of my sacrifices? Over the years, my character has mellowed through worship. Learning to ride allows one to traverse the landscapes. Although it was for him, ultimately, it has become my own skill. I should thank him for that. I was naive in my youth, mistaking the gratitude of being saved for love. In retrospect, Xieshini is a good man. He would save anyone who fell into a mire, regardless of their gender or appearance. I mused, perhaps it is not Xieshini I fell in love with, but rather the time I devoted to pursuing him. All those wasted years were merely my own self-inflicted turmoil. By the end of my words, tears were at the corners of my eyes, accompanied by a sense of relief at finally voicing my thoughts. Xia Wangji beckoned me to come closer. He tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear and softly said, "Once I have recovered, shall we go riding? I have raised 2 little foals, twins, and when I am well again, they will have grown. Tomorrow, I will have someone bring them to show you." I looked at him in delight, and he awkwardly turned his face away, clearing his throat with a clenched fist. Suddenly, I realized, "Oh, does your wound hurt? I will go check if the medicine is ready." As I walked through the corridor, I turned a corner and saw 2 rolls of calligraphy and a ginseng root. I summoned the servant on duty, who appeared startled. "What? Did the 3rd young master not take these in?" "3rd young master? Yes, just now." The 3rd young master brought these items and said he was coming to check on the eldest young master's injury. I looked outside and saw a flock of swallows flying up to the eaves, but Xieshini was nowhere to be seen. Cui Sanyang's 2 brothers had died. They perished outside the city gates of Jinling, their bodies brutally mutilated. After the incident with the stone lion, the matriarch of the Xia family declared that those 2 must leave the capital, lest they tarnish the Xia family's reputation. Jinling was where Xieshini had arranged for them to go. The Xia family had no roots there, and he had asked a friend to find them work. He hoped that without the shelter of the Xia family, they would amend their ways in Jinling. However, things often do not go as planned. Upon arriving in Jinling, the Cui brothers only became more reckless, frequenting gambling houses and brothels with abandon. Xia Shini's friend, beleaguered by their debts, had written to him several times, already growing impatient. Song Ruoshi, having a distant uncle in Jinling who held an official position, learned of the news early on. In her letter, she asked me, "What do you think will happen if Cui Sanyang finds out about this?" If I were Xia Shini, I would naturally keep it a closely guarded secret. But ultimately, Cui Sanyang found out. Cui Sanyang beat the drum in front of the magistrate, accusing Xia Shini of hiring someone to kill. This caused a stir in the capital. Many young masters in the capital kept concubines, yet Xia Shini became the first to be bitten back by his own actions. Even my mother wrote to me, expressing gratitude that I had married into the Xia family, for otherwise, I would have known no peace. This incident may not have been orchestrated by Xia Shini, as the Cui brothers had made many enemies. Even if Xia Shini was responsible, how could a mere woman like Cui Sanyang bring down the Xia family's young master? I inquired about it with Xia Wangji. He said if I wished to know the truth, I could request the Jinui to investigate. I pondered and replied that it was unnecessary. The truth did not lie with me but with how Cui Sanyang would perceive it. With 2 lives lost, it was likely that she and Xia Shini would find it difficult to reconcile. The next time I saw Xia Shini was at a family banquet of the Xia family. During the festivities, my sister-in-law became inspired and played the zither, while I accompanied her with the flute. As I took my seat, Xia Wangji had already prepared a plate of crab meat for me. The matriarch of the Xia family watched with deep emotion. Reflecting on the past, she and my grandmother were the closest of childhood friends. However, after each married and had children, following their husbands through life's uncertainties, their connection gradually waned. Little did they imagine that in their twilight years, they would become relatives through their children's union. As grandmother Xia concluded her reminiscence, she fell silent, tears tracing paths down her cheeks, and mentioned how all her descendants had settled into families, except for her youngest grandson, Xia Shinji, who remained unmarried. She urged Lady Xia to swiftly arrange a match for him. Advanced in age and kept in the dark by those beneath her, she remained unaware of the affairs concerning Third Lady Cui. Yet, the scandal had erupted throughout the capital, who would willingly marry their cherished daughter into the Xia household as the Third Lady. Rumor had it that Lady Xia had discreetly begun seeking potential brides from distant regions. The meal concluded with each guest lost in private thoughts, the atmosphere heavy and subdued. Xia Shinji himself merely took a few bites before excusing himself from the table. That evening, when a servant announced the 3rd young master's request to see me, I nearly doubted my own ears. At such a late hour, with my hairpins and ornaments already removed, how could I properly receive a male visitor? I sent word to decline, suggesting any matters be discussed the following day. Yet the messenger returned, insisting that the young master refused to leave. Considering he was, after all, family, I reasoned there might be some urgent affair. As I dressed, I dispatched someone to inform Xia Wangji. Xia Shinji's face bore an unnatural flush, clearly intoxicated after his departure from the feast. He had grown noticeably thinner, evidence of the turmoil with Third Lady Cui. His late-night visit was improper in itself, but to stand obstinately at my door was beyond the pale. A brave maid stepped forward to urge him to step back. Xia Shinji lowered his gaze briefly before raising his eyes, now brimming with tears. Regret had finally seized him. In a trembling voice, he uttered, "As for Third Lady Cui, I merely pitied her loneliness." It occurred to me that he must have overheard my conversation with Xia Wangji that day. Gathering my sleeves, I regarded him calmly. "It has nothing to do with me," I stated. "There is no need for you to explain yourself to me." Xia Shinji opened his mouth, a torrent of words unspoken, and finally released a hoarse, bitter apology. Apologize for what? I had once prostrated myself 3,000 times before the Buddha, praying on his behalf, and bore scars from rains cutting into my hands. Yet these were acts of my own volition, none of his concern. I shook my head at him. "You owe me nothing. Xia Shinji, you owe me nothing." Recalling the great calamity foretold in his fate, I instructed a servant to retrieve the string of prayer beads from the shelf and hand it to him. "You once saved my life. Though my mother later visited your residence to express gratitude, mere worldly treasures could never convey the depth of my appreciation. Should you ever find yourself in need, our Su family holds some influence at court, and even my husband has connections abroad. If there is any way we can assist, you need only speak. This string of beads I have long consecrated before the Buddha, hoping it would safeguard your peace." Xia Shinji stared blankly at the bracelet, his heart as if gripped by an invisible hand. He let out a bitter laugh, his eyes filled with sorrow. I would rather you hated me. We were meant to be. As he stepped forward, a cool, detached voice interjected from behind. Third brother. Xia Wangji, having convalesced for some time, often appeared leisurely and unassuming. Now, standing beneath the eaves with his sleeves flowing and a piercing glare in his eyes, I was abruptly reminded that this man was the commander of the Imperial Guards of our great Jing, who oversaw the prison and possessed a profound, inscrutable mind. She is now the lady of the Xia household. What business could you possibly have with your elder sister-in-law at this hour? Xia Xinji retorted with resentment. Had I not been momentarily foolish, would this marriage have ever fallen to you? Xia Wangji positioned himself before me, casting a warning glance at his younger brother, and clapped his hands coldly. The third young master is inebriated. Attendants, escort him to his quarters to rest. Breaking free from the servants attempting to support him, Xia Xinji cried out, his voice choked with tears, Elder brother, you are of secondary birth. In our youth, my mother often treated you harshly, and when I erred, you frequently bore the punishment in my stead. Mother said you took on this marriage, with the power you hold today, why would you still heed her words? You desired to marry Miss C yourself, didn't you? I abruptly turned my gaze to Xia Wangji. Shielding me from view, his expression remained hidden. But I heard the mockery in his laughter. What if I did? I must thank you, third brother. Xia Xinji submitted a petition to the emperor, volunteering for garrison duty in Lingnan. While many scions of noble families sought military glory on the battlefield, Lingnan was an exception, a place of dense forests and poisonous miasmas, where one might perish in serpent-infested marshes before ever engaging the enemy. It was the most perilous assignment, with enlistment bonuses doubling those of other regions. His departure cast a shadow of uncertainty over his survival. Lady Xia fell gravely ill, having borne him in her 40s and, due to a seer's prophecy, sent her young son to a Buddhist temple. Enduring years of separation, she had finally rejoiced in his safe return to adulthood, only for him to insist on facing hardship in Lingnan. How could she endure it? Upon her recovery, she directed her wrath toward me, blaming me for Xia Xinji's misfortunes. By my reckoning, he was now 19, the very age prophesied for his great trial. My personal maid privately advised me to guard against Lady Xia, fearing that in her fury, she might contemplate harming me. I shook my head. Not only was the Su family illustrious, but the Xia household's prestige now largely rested on Xia Wangji, the commander of the Imperial Guards. She would not dare act against me. While it is wise to be wary, the one to watch was not myself. I dispatched 2 men to keep surveillance near 3rd Lady Chui's residence, ready to assist discreetly should any trouble arise. Sure enough, within days, word came that she had narrowly escaped poisoning and had been secretly escorted from the city. Henceforth, she would wander the vast world, her destination unknown. Xia Wangji's injuries fully healed by late winter. Holding a high position, answering only to the emperor and commanding numerous subordinates, he resumed his duties as soon as his wounds scabbed over. The world fears the Imperial Guards as living demons. Who could imagine that beneath the commander's brocade robes lay a body marred by scars? On the first day of spring, he finally had a day of rest. The weather was splendid, the sky a clear, azure expanse, and we decided to visit the equestrian grounds to see the 2 young foals, one named Solu, the other Qingjue. Both had grown, their coats gleaming sleekly in the sunlight, nuzzling our palms with warm, snorting breaths. Suddenly inspired, Xia Wangji mounted his horse, his spirit vibrant, his eyes alight with excitement. Leaning forward slightly, he raised an eyebrow at me. Dare you race me? Had he proposed any other contest, I might have hesitated. But he challenged my horsemanship. Lifting my chin, I met his gaze. And if you lose? Xia Wangji clasped his hands and smiled. I shall be at the mercy of the lady of the Xia household. My heart surged. Since our marriage, Xia Wangji had addressed me as my lady many times. But it had always felt perfunctory, a mere title, no different from calling out to a cat or dog. Never had it been like this. With laughter in his eyes and unrestrained boldness, slightly abashed, I averted my face and chided softly, then you must keep your word. Our robes billowed in the wind, dust swirling beside us, hoofbeats thundering like storm. I had never ridden so swiftly. The wind felt like blades against my face, yet I gritted my teeth, tightened my grip on the reins, and cracked the whip, streaking forward like a meteor. Xia Wangji kept pace closely, nearly neck and neck. As we galloped, all melancholy was left behind. I exhaled a breath of pent-up frustration, feeling only exhilaration. Beyond the final stream lay the end of the grounds. Raising my whip, I gave a fierce crack. Qingzhui reared with a triumphant whinny, leaping ahead over the rocky stream. I had won. Elation bubbled within me. Reining in my horse, I turned and rode upstream, calling out his name loudly. Xia Wangji. What is it? He replied, laughing, his eyes sparkling, lips curved in a smile. Why did you marry me? I am the eldest daughter of the Su family, betrothed to the Xies by tradition. But why did you marry me? I wanted to hear the reason unknown to me. What was it truly? Xia Wangji laughed heartily. I knew you would ask. Promise you won't be angry if I tell you? I may not match your riding skills. If you gallop off in a huff, I'd never catch you. I raised my whip solemnly. I won't be angry. Speak. At first, it was curiosity. What kind of maiden would reject Xia Shenji publicly? You know, he and I have had our differences since childhood. Later, I overheard that maiden say she had admired me for a long time. She spun that tale with such earnest solemnity. Stop. Don't say another word. Overcome with shame and anger, I resolved to teach Xia Wangji a lesson. He, however, was already on guard, with a hearty laugh. He flicked his whip and urged his steed forward. Su Muyun, do you dare to compete with me once more? Compete in what? The specifics are of little consequence, merely. The one who loses must accompany the victor until old age. The sun shone brightly, the fragrance of fresh grass permeated the air, and the stream sparkled with glimmering ripples. The man sat astride his horse, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My heart stirred, and I urged my horse to catch up. Let us compete then. Who is afraid? 2 years hence, Xia Shenji returned to the capital. By this time, the streets buzzed with tales of new and fresh happenings, and no one spoke of his past entanglement with Cui Sanyang. He returned to his residence without a hitch. After 2 years of honing his skills in the military, Xia Shenji had darkened a shade and exuded an even more composed demeanor. When he departed, his mother wept bitterly, declaring that if he dared to leave, he should not return. Now, upon his return, she saw her weary son and seemed to have forgotten the harsh words she had once spoken. He had come back to take up his post. The emperor had issued a decree appointing him as deputy commander, tasked with assisting in the defense of the capital. Xia Shenji was well aware that he would encounter Su Muyun upon his return, the young lady from the Su family who had nearly become his wife. He had pondered this matter several times during his journey home. Time had passed, and those were matters of 2 years prior, when they met again. It would be with decorum. His mother had written to inform him that Su Muyun was already with child and would give birth by the year's end. Yet, when he finally beheld Su Muyun through the screen, he could not help but clench his fists. Su Muyun was trimming a dwarf pine while conversing with Xia Wangji, mentioning that she had prepared a gift in advance for the Empress Dowager's birthday, and as the festive season approached, she encouraged him to socialize more with his colleagues. Such words were the province of a devoted wife. Xia Wangji appeared to listen, yet his attention was fixed solely on Su Muyun. He watched the scissors she wielded with rapt concern, fearing she might inadvertently injure herself. When Su Muyun noticed Xia Wangji's distraction, she stamped her foot and exclaimed, "Oh!" immediately. He snapped back to attention, soothing her. For a moment, Xia Shenji felt a disconnection. He had witnessed his elder brother once extracting a man's kneecap in the imperial prison. The appearance of Xia Shenji was akin to a blade slicing through a serene and beautiful canvas. The painting shattered and the dream dissipated. Upon seeing him, Su Muyun instantly retracted her girlish demeanor, restoring the poise and composure befitting a head of the household. She exchanged pleasantries with him, her greetings polite yet distant, leaving no room for error. Xia Shenji despised her for this. After all, they shared a history, did they not? While not idyllic, they had once discussed marriage. They had almost wed, a near miss owing to a girl named Cui Sanyang. It was said that she had moved to Jinling and opened a wonton stall at the city gate. As for how she fared, he had not dared to inquire further. He had once thought to be the hero who rescued her, only to find himself unable to weather the mundane trials of life. Rumors circulated that Cui Sanyang had seduced the third son of the Xia family. Yet, this was a gross injustice. The throngs patronizing her wonton stall were numerous. Had she wished to ensnare a wealthy suitor, she could have done so long ago. Why endure the peril of nearly freezing to death in the snow? Xia Xinji had initially fallen for her due to her indomitable spirit, yet in the end, it was that very spirit that led to his downfall. Once, they had quarreled over the matters concerning the Cui brothers, and Cui Sanyang had insisted on seeking her own means of livelihood. What folly! Which wife or concubine clamors to venture out and conduct business? His woman, Xia San's woman, engaging in menial labor outside, was that appropriate? Their arguments over such matters were frequent. On one heated occasion, Cui Sanyang had scratched him, leaving a red, broken skin mark on his neck that would fade in a few days, but left him unable to face anyone for quite some time. In frustration, Xia Xinji shattered a teacup. In truth, he did not love Su Muyin, yet in that fleeting moment, he found himself regretting why he had not married her. They were well matched, with a decree of marriage and shared interests and circles. Su Muyin knew precisely how to fulfill the duties of a mistress of the house. What folly! Why had he not married Su Muyin? Xia Xinji smiled bitterly. He could have been so happy. Why had he relinquished that happiness to his elder brother? Xia Xinji was a man of unwavering resolve, yet in this matter, he could not help but ruminate endlessly, such thoughts spiraling within him like wild vines. This was particularly true each time he witnessed their companionship. He had visited his elder brother's villa, where the atmosphere was oppressive and devoid of warmth due to strict regulations. The servants were perpetually on edge, fearing punishment. Now that Su Muyin was present, she was considerate of her subordinates, and the atmosphere among the maids and matrons had lightened considerably. A flower bed had appeared in the garden, adorned with purple morning glories. And what of him? He had become the subject of ridicule in the capital, having been brought to court by Cui Sanyang. His mother, though she said nothing, bore strands of white in her hair. Xia Xinji had once been bitten by a venomous creature in Ling'an, burning with fever for 3 days and nights before awakening, clutching tightly to the Buddhist beads he had worn for years. Others remarked on his great fortune. Only he understood that the third son of the Xia family had long since perished in the calamity of his 19th year. The end of the tale. Thank you for listening. We shall meet again in the next story.